Hello. So today I'm going to talk about a part of the brain that's called the right anterior insula, and I will also be mentioning a lot of the biases that are present in our existing autism research and some of the problems associated with that. So to get started, the right anterior insula, if you look up what is the insula reciprocally connects the frontal brain regions such as the anterior cingulate, the orbitofrontal, and medial prefrontal cortices, which are implicated in cognitive, emotional, and executive functions, and projects to parts of the brain implicated in motivation and reward. That is a mouthful to say. Wow. So I'm here to translate what that means to you all. So there's a part of the brain called the right anterior insula that is basically the part of the brain that controls social rewards. So for neurotypical people, they go out and socialize, they talk to people, and the right anterior insula will light up and work together with the dopamine part of the brain, and they will get rewards from each of these social interactions. The right anterior insula also controls interoception, like knowing whether you're thirsty, whether you're hungry, whether you're tired, and stuff like that. But it's crucially important in social rewards. So going to talk to someone, you get a reward from that if you're neurotypical. If you're neurodiverse, there's a lot more variance. And so basically these neurotypical researchers were trying to make conclusions about autism. So they put autistic people in social situations and then observed their MRI patterns compared to neurotypical people who were socializing and then also had an MRI. And they saw that in neurotypical people, the right anterior insula lit up, and in autistic people, it did not. So what was the conclusion of this study? The conclusion was that we must somehow be deficient. Autistic people must somehow be deficient because that specific part of the brain responsible for social rewards does not light up when we socialize. However, they neglected a lot of research because, as it turns out, autistic people, when they're focused on their special interests, other parts of the brain start to light up. So if you were to take an MRI of someone who's autistic and doing their special interest compared to a neurotypical doing whatever they like to do, the autistic brain is actually going to be bringing in more activity in the right anterior cingulate and insula. So in other words, the way that we feel when we're doing special interests is probably pretty similar to how neurotypical feel when they socialize. This was pretty mind-blowing for me to discover, because at first I was doing all this research and I'm like, okay, maybe I'm deficient, maybe this part of my brain doesn't work right, it could be that, or it could be a result of biased researchers, because these researchers could only see things from their singular perspective. These researchers could only imagine that you have to get a social reward, and if you don't get a social reward, then it's somehow deficient. But they never took into account the fact that this part of the brain, the insula, lights up when other activities are present. And so this was mind-blowing for me to discover. It kind of gave me a new mindset, like, okay, wow, I guess I'm not actually deficient. I'm not deficient in this particular part of the brain. Rather, it's a reallocation. Instead of me getting this brain activity when I'm talking to people and socializing, I get it from other things like making music, like petting dogs. So how I feel when I'm petting a dog and listening to music is probably how neurotypical feel when they socialize. I don't know to which extent, and it's really hard for me to quantify this since I'm not neurotypical, and honestly I don't have a whole lot of neurotypical friends. So I don't know how to measure it. It would be really cool if we could have a quantifiable measurement of dopamine rewards and right anterior insula lighting up, and put the neurotypical in a social situation and the autistic in a special interest situation, and then compare the MRIs of that. I would be interested to see that kind of research. Unfortunately, no such research like this currently exists, but I think that in the future it definitely could. So now there are other parts of this that get really interesting. So it turns out there are actually specific substances that trigger the right anterior insula. And so one of these substances happens to be cannabis, or weed as it's commonly called. Cannabis lights up the right anterior insula, which is, like I said, the part of the brain responsible for interoception and connected to social rewards. I should also mention this part of the brain is connected to what is called the orbitofrontal cortex, which is responsible for sensory integration. This is huge. Absolutely huge, because this means that at the very least, THC, CBD, mostly THC from the research I've looked at, has the capabilities of increasing activity in this part of the brain, the right anterior insula. And so it kind of makes me wonder if autistic people were to smoke weed or consume THC in some other way, would they be more likely to socialize? Would it be more of a fun event if that part of the brain was lighting up? Would it be a completely different experience? These are all questions I don't necessarily have the answers to, but it's really fascinating to consider this. And so then there's other activities as well that also trigger this anterior insula activity. So one of these activities is supposedly playing chess. Supposedly playing chess, the right anterior insula lights up, which I found pretty hilarious because when I was a kid, that was actually one of my special interests for about a year. I'd want to play chess constantly, play with my dad. It was like a family bonding activity we would do, just him and I, because no one else in the family really liked chess. But it kind of blew my mind that chess overall, like across the board for both neurotypical people and neurodivergent, can trigger this part of the brain. So that was pretty cool. And then there's other things as well that can trigger it. So there's a meditation called Wim Hof. Now, I don't know if you've heard of him or not, but Wim Hof is basically known as the Iceman. He's this guy who swam 63 meters in freezing cold ice water, and he runs marathons in the mountains, and he basically is, quote, impervious to the cold, because he figured out and developed a breathing exercise that regulates and activates the insula. And the insula is the part of the brain that controls temperature regulation. So if anyone who is autistic is listening to this, if you struggle a lot with temperature regulation, it's probably because of your insula being underactive at that point in time. And so one thing that I've observed that has helped me tremendously in the past year and a half, 2 years, I've been doing Wim Hof meditations consistently. So these meditations consist of holding your breath. First you breathe really heavily, and when you breathe really quickly, you actually technically hyperventilate and push oxygen into your muscles. And then you can hold your breath for significantly longer than you would otherwise, because the oxygen is in your muscles and you don't need to necessarily inhale to keep existing. I've been doing his meditations for about a year and a half, recently got to 2 minutes breath hold. It was absolutely intense. It was insanity. But the point is that this meditation triggers the insula, and it also triggers the orbitofrontal cortex. So what I've observed from doing these meditations is that every time I do this, it's like everything gets turned on overdrive. Like let's say sensory overstimulation, it's like that times 1,000,000. And in the moment, it feels uncomfortable. In the moment. However, it is slowly rewiring my brain by doing this consistently, teaching my brain to become less reactive. So the autistic brain has increased functional connectivity between a part of the brain called the amygdala and orbitofrontal cortex. Amygdala is the part of the brain responsible for fear responses. So if you feel really afraid, that's the amygdala activating. In autistic people, there are greater functional connections to the orbitofrontal cortex, which is responsible for sensory processing. In other words, whenever loud noises scare us, it's not irrational. Whenever a loud noise triggers anxiety, it's not irrational. We actually have greater functional connectivity, which is causing a measurable amygdala fear response. And so looping back to Wim Hof, the way this works is that every time I do Wim Hof, I am significantly increasing activity in both orbitofrontal and the insula. And so I already have too many connections in the orbitofrontal cortex. And so more activity makes all of my sensory issues worse for the moment. But what I do, as I continue to do these meditations, it's actually reducing the coupling with the amygdala. I am literally rewiring my brain to produce and process, to process sensory information in a different way. So whereas previously maybe the orbitofrontal cortex would be triggered from hearing a loud noise, and then immediately trigger the amygdala, the fear response center, I'm retraining my brain through the process of meditation to reduce this coupling so that there's less of a fear response. It's kind of similar to training for a marathon. Yeah, when you're running really long, really hard, and you've never done a marathon before, it hurts. It doesn't feel comfortable. It doesn't feel good. Not when you're training, not when you're getting started. I mean, yeah, runner's high is a thing, but that aside, it's hard work. It's really difficult to be able to train your body and get it ready for whatever it is you're about to do. But once you get to that point, it's a lot easier and it's a lot more rewarding. This is exactly what I'm trying to do with my brain. I'm trying to put my brain in as many, I guess, stressful, but yet controlled stress and non-traumatizing environments. Because there's a big difference between some of the therapies they use in Autism Speaks and ABBA, where they just take a child and force them to listen to the loudest noises possibly imaginable for weeks and years even on end. I feel really bad for anyone who has had to go through that. It's seriously abuse. But in a meditation state where I have full control over everything, what's going on, I mean in terms of the set and setting and the environment and whatnot, I've observed that doing Wim Hof consistently is significantly improving the sensory processing, significantly reducing the amount that my amygdala gets triggered from these loud noises, bright lights, whatever it is. And it's actually allowing me to have a greater degree of control over my sympathetic nervous system. My goal is not necessarily to be like Wim Hof. I don't have really a desire to be the next ice woman, biking in freezing 20-degree Fahrenheit weather. No, I don't really care about that. My goal is to rewire my brain, and not even to be neurotypical, because I don't want that, and I don't think autistic people should want that. I think we should learn to accept who we are and find ways that work for us. No, my goal is to be the best version of myself that I can be. And meditation of any kind improves overall global communication between different parts of the brain, which is naturally deficient in autism. So through the process of a regular, relaxing meditation process and doing Wim Hof consistently, I'm actually able to increase activity in the insula, allowing me to improve my interoception, allowing me to reduce the fear responses triggered from sensory issues, and allowing me to rewire the brain in such a way that I can handle things I wasn't able to handle it before. I'm literally replacing these trauma responses that were present from birth with new selected responses. If you've heard of Joe Dispenza, apparently he has a whole show on this. I didn't realize he had a show until last week, but I'm a big fan of him. I believe truly that we can heal ourselves in so many more ways than people think, and that our perceptions and beliefs about what we can do are one of our either greatest strengths or greatest weaknesses. I refuse to be bound by the narrative that doctors and other people tell me. I used to have a bunch of eye problems, eye disease that triggered when I was a kid. I was 12 or 13 years old. Basically, doctors told me I would never be able to see better than 20/70 in my bad eye. but through meditation, through yoga, through eating healthy, through exercise, doing all the right things, and believing that it was possible for me to exist in a state where I had two good eyes. I was able, last week, I went to the eye doctor, and literally was able to see 20/30 in my bad eye. Going from almost blinded, God knows, 26 times, to now being able to see 20/30, it was really amazing. It was such an emotional moment, both for me and for my family, my parents, who are always there for me and supporting me in this. But my point is not to make you think that I'm some kind of a medical miracle, even if that's what doctors seem to say sometimes. No, I don't think that's it. I think it's that I'm not willing to believe the limitations that other people impose upon me. I think my autism is one of my greatest strengths in this respect, because I am not naturally drawn to conform. In fact, I'm naturally drawn to more or less be what you'd call a rebel. If someone says something, my first gut instinct is to challenge whatever it is. And maybe this isn't always apparent. My parents used to think I'd believe anything. But I think that there's a difference between what you believe and what you're willing to listen to. Just because I'm willing to listen to anyone talk about anything doesn't necessarily mean that I believe what they're saying or that I agree with them. I just got really good at listening to people even when I disagree with them without rejecting them. And I think that's an important distinction to make. But my point is, if I can do this, this is all relatively basic stuff. I mean, physical limitations, it may not seem that basic, but it is basic compared to mental limitations. You get stuck in thought loops and stuff like that. I think the physical stuff is among the easiest to heal. I really do. And the mental stuff is easy as well, but it requires a little bit more habits, and a little bit more consistency, and a willingness to engage in activities that you might not otherwise do. If you consistently make it a habit to go out and try something new, you're rewiring your neural pathways. Even if it's something as simple as you're driving to work, I'm going to pick a new road. I'm going to drive down this road I've never been. I'm going to go to this restaurant I've never been to. And I know how crazy that sounds if you're autistic listening to this. Wait, she's telling me I should do something outside of my routine? Yes, I am telling you that if you want to rewire your brain and be able to start healing the trauma associated simply from being autistic in a neurotypical environment, you gotta push outside of your comfort zone just enough. I hesitate to use that phrase because a lot of times neurotypical people will say that and they actually mean abuse, but I don't mean it in that respect. Whenever you do something new or do something in a different way that you did it before, it regenerates and rebuilds more neural connections. And so I think it's really important to be willing to do that. Not all the time. I love routine probably more than anyone, honestly. I love my routine. I love my daily life. I love everything about it. And whenever I have to do something that isn't my routine, it's tough. It's really tough for me. But I keep doing it consistently because I really do want to rewire the trauma that has basically been with me since birth. Wim Hof is one powerful tool to do that. Cannabis and weed and CBD, super powerful tool to do that. Yoga, powerful tool to do that. Meditation is a powerful tool to do that. There's so many different things you could do. There's so many things. There's not just one path. You could take multiple paths that lead to the same place. And ultimately, I'm not here to tell you what to do. You gotta find solutions that work for you. Because that's the whole crux of the problem. As an autistic person, you're born into an environment where everyone in the world is telling you how to do it, what you should do, how you should act, what you should be. I'm telling you no. You gotta find what works for you. You gotta be who you are. Because every time you block a little bit more of who you are, every time you have to hide it and mask it, it takes a toll. It takes a pretty significant toll, both with masking and with even physical stuff like autoimmune diseases. If you suppress your stimming, that triggers autoimmune diseases. I honestly think that my eye disease was triggered from all of the stress of being undiagnosed autistic, having no outlet for it, not knowing what was going on, and being more or less subjected to a world filled with expectations of me being neurotypical when I wasn't. I think that as much as my parents gave me a wonderful environment to be able to express myself, there was still school, bullies, so many other people in my life that were projecting those expectations onto me, and especially by middle school it caused such a great deal of stress. I think it's absolutely no coincidence that my autoimmune eye disease flared up when I was 13. I was 8th grade. I had spent 2.5, 3 years of suffering in middle school from bullies, people trying to choke me, people emotionally abusing me. Like, it was bad. It was really bad. Middle school was the worst time of my entire life. It really was. And I'm spending my days now, even sometimes, trying to rewire a lot of those memories. Trauma is not always easy to rewire, but it is possible. I'm here to tell you not to give up hope. You gotta believe in yourself. You gotta believe you can do it, because your perceptions are what create your reality. I am here telling you that it works. It works. It really works. It works for me. It works for anyone who's willing to try it. It works for anyone who's able to say, I'm gonna take a step back from my beliefs and my expectations, and I'm gonna take a leap of faith and try this out. I'm gonna try this for myself without taking anyone else's word for it, and I'm gonna rely on my personal experience first before anything else. Because when you do this, you stop gaslighting your experiences, you start listening to yourself, you start learning your intuition, you start learning your triggers, you start becoming the observer of everything you believe and everything you think, and you can see almost the source code of your very fabric of your existence. Why did I say that? Why did I do this? Even for people who don't analyze a lot, which, if you're neurotypical, maybe you fit in this category, maybe. Not all people who are NTs do that, but I find that NDs tend to analyze a lot more. It still might be worth asking yourself, what are my daily habits? How can I change my daily habits to make my life better in some small, insignificant way? Because it's really the small stuff that builds up to the big stuff. It's not like, oh, my life changed overnight most of the time. It's that you've changed your habits. You've changed the small things that you think that don't maybe matter individually, but then they build up to a greater collective and change the course of your entire life. I spent 26 years systematically analyzing my life, analyzing everyone. You could even arguably say I have a special interest in people, because that's really the only way that I could have been interested in socializing, I think. I wanted to know everything about psychology when I was 16. I started studying it and Googling it, maybe even earlier than that, just trying to figure people out, because I couldn't understand why would this person want to dress like that, or why would this person do that? None of it made sense, and I was desperately trying to look for answers, so I studied a lot of psychology to find some of those answers. And I think that's one really cool part. Like, yeah, there's not enough research. There's not, about autism in general. And unfortunately, for autistic people, the truth is that all the research that we have access to pretty much has been discovered or written by NTs, neurotypical people, who have their own perceptions. And it's really hard to step outside of your own perceptions. It's extremely hard. I mean, if you're ND, imagine what it's like to be NT. If you're NT, imagine what it's like to be ND. Like, it just doesn't work like that. You can't. I mean, you can to some extent, I guess, by listening to different podcasts or music or talking to people who are different from you. But it's really tough to be able to step outside of your expectations and perceptions about the way that things should be and look at them through as an objective lens as possible. It's not easy. If you're neurotypical, I ask you to do this next time you interact with someone socially. Next time you interact with someone, become aware and observe all of the little things that you don't even realize go into social interactions. Building rapport with people, mimicking their body language, arms crossed maybe, arms on hips maybe, Who knows, rocking back and forth or just standing straight. Where are the toes pointed? Like, there's so many details that I could list off for you that I have to consciously remember. And magically, neurotypical people know exactly how to do it based on a subconscious framework that they're born with. That's kind of incredible to me to even realize, too. But NDs, we have to consciously analyze it all. Neurodivergence, we have to have rules about it, particularly autistic people, because it's the only framework we have. But I'm here to tell you, if you're autistic, you're not deficient. You're wired differently, yes. You may have aspects of your disorder that make it a disorder for you, yes. You may have some things that you're suffering from autism, yes. And maybe your higher support needs, and you need other people in your life to be able to do basic things. Maybe you're struggling a lot, and if you are, I'm sorry, and I'm here for you. I can relate to a lot of struggles, but I'm also blessed to be relatively low support needs. And I think that people with higher support needs, their voices need to be amplified. It's tricky to do because a lot of us are nonverbal, but that doesn't mean that we're deficient people. Just because someone doesn't speak does not mean that they're not brilliant. Just because someone can't convey their ideas does not mean those ideas aren't there. And just because someone does something that's a little bit different from the way that you would do it does not mean that your way is superior or the only way. We live in a world, autistic people live in a world of neurodivergence and neurotypicals, but neurotypicals are 98% of the population, at least as of right now. Maybe there's less of them than that, but so this makes it really hard, because how do I know how people with lower support needs feel? The truth is, I don't. I mean, I can think about my experience and share that with you, and hope that by sharing my experience, I'll encourage you to be more of yourself. All of the parts of yourself that you're afraid of, all the awkwardness, everything that you're insecure about, everything that you think is not good about who you are, well, I'm here to advocate that those might be the greatest parts about you. And this is true for everyone, regardless of your neurotype. You're not deficient. You're enough. You're worthy, just the way you are. And you don't have to ask for anyone else's validation of this. You're already enough to be yourself. You don't have to hide it so much. Yes, masking is important if you're autistic or ADHD or struggling with anything else. Yes, masking has a time and place, but you gotta find ways to unmask, because that's part of who you are. And I think that that's someone is really beautiful. I think if you can find a way to, at the very least, accept these parts of you that you're so afraid of, at the very best, embrace them, you'll find that you'll begin to create the life of your dreams. And that you'll start attracting other people into your life who feel exactly the same way. You're enough. You're worthy. And you're perfect exactly the way that you are, regardless of what some random researcher on the internet says.